What did it say? And what do you expect a budget policy to say? What does it outline?
Well, generally, what I would like to see in a budget policy statement is a bit ambition. So I would like to see where the government wants to take us. I would like to see some clearly spelled out visions and goals and targets. And I would like to see basically what this government plans to do, not just in fiscal policy, but generally speaking, about the economy, about productivity. And on all of that, actually, the budget policy statement was relatively weak.
Okay, what did it say then if it didn't give you, I don't know, hope for the future and a swelling of patriotism in your heart, Oliver? What did it tell us?
Well, that's exactly what I would have liked to receive, of course, but it wasn't in there because I can just give you a few quotes that give you a general flavor of the document. They say that a longer-term objective for the government is to reduce core crown expenses towards 30% of GDP. Now, the towards is the key here because it doesn't actually say we're going to reach the 30%, but we just want to move in some kind of direction. But it's not very specific.
It's kind of like, we'll give it a crack. We'll give it our best shot, but don't expect too much.
It's the political equivalent of that. And similarly speaking, they talk about budget deficits, the so-called Obergall, that's the operating balance. And they say they want to see a steadily improving Obergall trajectory. Now, again, this is something that every government would say, and I think even Labour said exactly the same with the same wording. And then what they also say is they are saying that they would like to see net core crown debt on a downwards trajectory. Now, I mean, give me a break. We all want to see debt come down, but give me a bit more specific data. They say they would like to see it somewhere below 40% of GDP, which is still quite high. And then they would like to keep it in that 20 to 40% range. But they are not very specific. They are not really telling us when we can expect this, how fast this will be. And even 40% debt to GDP is quite high. Where they are really silent on the details is actually on anything that might get us towards a growing economy, a more productive economy, because on that one, the document is pretty silent. There's nothing in it. And the other thing that I find strange is actually this would be a chance now for the new government to say, actually, the fiscal management of our predecessors, that wasn't up to scratch. We would like to do better. We found the finances in a really sorry state. And we aim to get back to roughly where we were in 2017. But there is no such statement in there. But actually, I just got the figures for you, just to give you a bit of a comparison. By 2017, at the end of the last national-led government, we had core crown spending at 27.3% of GDP. We had revenue at 29.4%, so slightly higher, and that left us with a budget surplus of 1.9%. And core crown debt, that's the figure that they're now trying to get down towards 40%, was 19.4%. So that just shows you how much this has shifted.
Wow,
in the last 6
that
years.
shows you 6 years where we have just gone backwards at a rate of knots in terms of economic indicators.
Massively. So I think for the new government, the chance would have been to say, look, this is where we were 6 years ago. Our predecessors basically left us this mess. Now we have to clean this up, and we want to get back to at least where we were in 2017. But there is no such indication. I think this government could have been a lot more ambitious.
Do you get the feeling, Oliver, that stripping aside all the rhetoric of an incoming government saying the last lot were terrible, there were things there they hid from you, it's a pretty normal party political or partisan political strategy that. Do you think there is in some way a genuine shock and a genuine confusion as to how bad things were when they, got the Treasury advice and looked at the figures? Is there a certain amount of, if you like, fiscal shock going on with the new administration here?
There is, to a degree. I mean, we all knew that the figures were bad, even before the change of government. We all suspected that the previous government actually hit some of the really nasty figures somewhere where only the next government would eventually find them. But no, I think this is a combination of things. So yes, the figures are worse than expected. This is also something to do with the state of the economy being worse than expected, because economic growth has disappeared. We are now officially in recession. That's perhaps something the new government didn't quite anticipate. And therefore the figures look worse. And by the way, they're not giving us updated forecasts, really. They still have the forecast from last year. They haven't updated them. So I think if they had updated this in the budget policy statement, which usually governments do, I think the figures would have looked far worse. So the only way to explain that is actually that they had given us a commitment, of course, to tax cuts before the election. And I think actually they find it very difficult politically to move away from that, even though economically this is what they should be doing.
All right. The government has, though, given a few signals. I saw Nicola Willis on Monday saying the tax relief, the tax cuts we promised are still going to go ahead. Did this budget statement restate that commitment?
Well, she said that yesterday, and curiously, she also then hinted at some new revenue measures. Now, you have to translate that. That means new taxes.
Well, no.
So
I wanted to get to this because there's a funny thing in the coverage I read. She said no new taxes, but new revenue streams. How on earth does a government, unless I suppose it's asset selling or profit sharing on operational business, how does a government make any money apart from taking it off you through some form of tax?
That's exactly right. I mean, of course, they could sell some assets. I'm not sure whether that's really what they're going to do. So I read this statement as we're going to increase some taxes, maybe somewhere in a hidden way. And of course, we get this on commercial landlords already with a lack of depreciation options now. So yeah, that's a hidden tax increase. So some tax increases will pay for the tax cuts that they want to deliver. And of course, that's roughly what they promised in the election campaign. So in the election campaign, they thought they could get some money in via a foreign buyers tax. They thought that they could raise some money with a gambling tax. And of course, they also banked heavily on revenue from the emissions trading scheme. Now, none of this is really going to materialize in this way. The foreign buyers tax was killed in the coalition agreements. And then the ETS is suffering from the fact that actually the previous government flooded the market with too many credits. And so therefore, I don't know whether there's much revenue to be made for the government. And the gambling tax, I thought, was always a bit optimistic on the revenue projections. So it doesn't look that good. So I think actually what I would do in government, I would now say, look, we had a closer look at the books. Labour left us a mess. The economy has tanked, also probably due to the previous government's mismanagement of the economy. And therefore, we are in a situation where as much as we would like to deliver tax cuts for all,
we can't.
Our first priority... Yeah, exactly. Our first priority would be to consolidate the budget because, as we know, as long as we're running budget deficits and we're then delivering tax cuts, basically what we're doing is we're deferring future taxes. So someone has to pay for this. And we are currently already in a situation where New Zealand is paying about $10 billion in interest on our debt. And that's twice the police budget. So seriously, I think consolidation of the budget should have absolute priority, followed very closely and linked to increases in productivity. And then maybe down the track in 2 or 3 years' time, when we have done that, when we have brought finances back under control, when debt is sinking, when we are recording a budget surplus rather than a deficit, then I think would be a good time to think about about tax cuts. But until we get there, the task is really to bring spending under control because it has ballooned under Labour and we need to get it back to at least where it was in 2017.
Yeah. And I mean, the fact is that no finance minister is an economic wizard. You cannot find money from tax cuts by waving a magic wand and that it comes from nowhere.